Do we have a new Hollywood blacklist? This may be a shorter program, by the way. I'm definitely trying to cut them all off in an hour. Sometimes I have a really good guest. I'll go a little bit past the hour, the end of the start of the new hour. But generally, this program is at most an hour long, maybe a little shorter. Today, the day before Thanksgiving, I do want to help prepare our feast. We are having friends and relatives over. And so I want to help my wife because she does so much of the work. All right. So the new Hollywood blacklist. Let's get right to it here. Now, I know people who are people in Hollywood, but I myself don't know anything but that they're people in Hollywood, that they're big shots or they're, medium shots or whatever. Apparently, Maha Dakil was and may still be a pretty big Hollywood shot. Here she is, top CAA, and CAA is one of those big agencies where they represent the movie stars and the writers and the directors. I'm not sure if they represent the directors. Are directors represented? They probably are. I don't know. Anyway, so Maha Dakil, she posted, this is actually, if you look at the dateline, this is over a month old, but the story is back in the news, so that's why I'm picking it up today. The agent Maha Dakil sparked controversy with her social media post calling Israel's Hamas response genocide. Well, seems reasonable to me to call it genocide. We're going to get into that a little bit more. Was that reasonable? Is it okay? Can you call what Israel's doing to Gaza genocide? And I have, although I've also always add the caveat, I don't love that term except under very, very clear-cut circumstances, like what the Nazis did to the Jews, like what the Nazis did to the Gypsies, like what the Turks did to the Armenians, where they targeted ethnic enclaves throughout Turkey, throughout Anatolia, and killed people. I think, was it the Hutus who slaughtered Tutsis, two different tribes? They were slaughtered because they were a member of a distinct tribal community. That's genocide. I think the situation in Gaza has similarities to those atrocities, to those crimes against humanity. I do think what Israel is doing is a crime against humanity. I am okay calling it genocide. I have called it genocide, but I understand if people argue it's not. I think this is one of those kind of borderline situations. Whatever you call it, it's evil. And I understand some folks don't want to get into that debate. They're like, hey, call it what you like. It's murder. So Maha Dakil said it's genocide on social media. And then she apologized. She said, I want to thank my Jewish friends and colleagues who pointed out the implications and further educated me. So she backed down. She caved. She makes a ton of money. She's powerful in her career choice. She's extraordinarily successful. I guess she didn't want to jeopardize it. Or maybe she really felt educated. To me, there's something extraordinarily condescending of when people educate others. And some of you might say, well, but you're trying to educate us. And I want a dialogue. It's true. Some of the things I say, I hope will resonate. Some of my comments about certainly endless war and about the new Holocaust, the climate catastrophe, I hope people will think about that and maybe modify their behaviors, especially for whom they vote. So I guess you could call that educating. So maybe that is kind of arrogant, condescending. I understand that. But I also am prepared to be educated by you. And I think I've had callers who said, hey, I appreciate that because you do listen and you do recognize other people's perspectives. As long as there's a dialogue, that's fine. I get the sense, though, that the people who, quote, educated, unquote, Maha Dakil weren't interested in a dialogue. They weren't interested in what she had to say. They were interested in pushing her down, saying no more. You don't get to say that. Why would I make that point? Why am I not willing to give the benefit of the doubt to the folks who educated Mahad Dakhil. And we'll get into that. So the story I just showed you was from the October 19th issue of Variety. Here, this is the November 21st headline. Today's the 22nd, I think. So this is from yesterday by Tatiana Stiegel, who is a writer for Variety. And I thought she does a nice job with this. So good job, Tatiana. They get into the story. There's a follow-up, right? It's been a month, 2 days since Mahad Dakhil was dressed down, presumably by her bosses, whatever, for calling Israel and by others. And there were threats levied against her. Apparently, she backed down. She's apologized. She said she was educated. The story continues. The Scream movie franchise, one of their stars was fired. Clients are booted from agencies and a secret Tom Cruise meeting. Tom Cruise comes out of this looking awfully good, which to me is always a surprise when Tom Cruise looks good. I liked him in Risky Business, but not much since then I'm even familiar with it. Not even that familiar with his work, although he's been in a ton of huge movies. Very, very successful. So from the November 21 Variety, what's going on at two huge Hollywood agencies? And one, CAA, is, I think it's Creative Arts Agency, I think is what that is. Maybe I'm wrong. I think that's what we're talking about with CAA. And another big one is WME. So this Variety article talks about both CAA, and WME. So let's get into it. 4 days after October 7th, this goes back to the Mahad Dakhil controversy in October when she posted about the genocide. 4 days after the Hamas terror attacks in Israel, WME, one of the Hollywood agencies, invited Steve Leader, the rabbi from Wilshire Boulevard Temple, to visit the agency's Beverly Hills headquarters. So we're talking about, and I'm making an assumption here, rich, very rich, influential people, all of them. People who run WME, their clients, their top agents, and also the rabbis, because this is a powerful temple, Wilshire Boulevard Temple, Beverly Hills. Wealthy, right? I know that's a trope, but we're not talking about some Hasidic community in like far eastern Los Angeles in the desert in Bakersfield or Riverside or someplace like that. Talking about Beverly Hills, we're talking about Hollywood. These are important, influential people, certainly within the movie community. So Leader, whatever it's pronounced, however it's pronounced, was invited to visit WME. And I have a huge problem with this. I want to just say right now, he came to provide comfort for employees reeling after the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Was it an attack on the Jewish people? See, this is where Variety, I don't like that phrasing. Was this the worst attack on the Jewish people? If you said it was the worst attack that Jews have sustained since the Holocaust, that would be fair because the victims are Jewish. But were they attacked because they're Jewish, or were they attacked because they're Israeli? Because there is a distinction. In Pittsburgh, several years ago, I think, there was a horrible massacre at a Pittsburgh synagogue where many were killed. That was an attack on the Jewish people. It was clearly an anti-Semitic hate crime. I don't know that I'm going to go that far to say what happened in Israel was an anti-Semitic hate crime. It was an anti-Israel attack. So Variety's already adopting here, and I don't like it, but they did a good job with the story, so I'll just make this point. They're already adopting tendentious biased language, in my opinion. Later, the rabbis invited to speak at WME. I have a problem with that. WME is a business. It's an agency. It's a workplace. The employees are presumably of many different faiths. Some are not of any faith. They're from various ethnicities and races. I don't see why you invite a rabbi in that circumstance to talk about what happened in Israel. Now, what you could do, and I would recommend that you would do this, is give an opportunity to your employees to take a day off, to go to the synagogue, right? If they want to hear from a rabbi, that's the place to do it. I don't think the workplace is the place for this rabbi to be giving a speech or presenting his perspective on what happened in Israel on October 7th. Now, I'll give you an example of a time when I think maybe inviting a rabbi makes sense. Let's say there's a lot of anti-Semitic activity within the workplace or allegations of anti-Semitism. Maybe then you bring in some faith leaders to help, to talk, to listen. Maybe that would make sense. I don't think this fits that description. You disagree, let me know. 240-363-7190. You agree? Let me know. The event was not mandatory, nor should it have been. The speech was considered secular. That's kind of weird because he is a rabbi. But several staffers complained. And the co-chairman of the organization, rather than I don't know, Richard Weitz, maybe Jewish, sounds like, in Christian Mirrorhead, I don't think Jewish, with the name Christian. But rather than saying, hey, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have done that, or we're sorry, whatever, they invited the CEO of the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt, to speak. And that was just throwing fuel on the fire, obviously. Rather than listening, rather than engaging in a dialogue to hear what the concerns were, Greenblatt says, the real problem here is the writers, some of whom you represent, aren't condemning Hamas. Well, that's just not appropriate in the workplace. I don't agree with him at all, but you give that speech. We can argue about it. If you're going to go to a captive audience at a workplace, then you have an absolute obligation, in my opinion, to listen. Not just to, quote, educate. Not just to tell people why they're wrong, or the people that they like are wrong, or that they support are wrong. Obviously, that isn't the perspective of ADL CEO Jonathan Greenblatt. And he elucidated, he elaborated what was wrong. So is there a Hollywood blacklist, right? If you say something that ADL CEO Jonathan Greenblatt doesn't like, could you lose your job in Hollywood? It sure looks like it. I would call that a new blacklist. Is it an abrogation of freedom of speech? No, because freedom of speech is something that the government has to afford you. That means you can't be arrested. You can't be locked up. You can't be fired from a government job in consequence of protected speech. And there are certain distinctions between whether you can be fired rather than criminally charged. In some cases, a government employee can fire you for saying something, but you couldn't be criminally charged, which makes sense, right? Employers have different burdens than do the criminal justice system, different requirements. So here's, though, more from what Greenblatt said. And to me, this is just demonstrating that our movies are, regardless of whether movie stars embrace identity politics regardless of whether, some movie directors include kind of like, slightly under the radar sympathy for poor people, regardless of any of that, regardless of whether George Clooney gives, $10 million to the Democratic National Committee, it doesn't mean that Hollywood is really, in any sense, progressive. In the end, the money people make the decisions. In the end, you have to support certain political perspectives, whether you agree or not, or you lose your job. So I really don't want to hear people talking about how liberal Hollywood is. Here's what Greenblatt says. There's just no excuse for not condemning Hamas and demanding the release of the hostages. There's no excuse. And according to Greenblatt, there's plenty of room for criticism of Israel or to voice concerns about the ongoing war. I don't think it's a war in Gaza. I wish maybe you had said what your concerns were, Mr. Greenblatt. That would have been helpful if you showed some empathy, if you were willing to understand other people's perspective. But regardless of what your views are, you don't have an open license to wage unfair accusations against Israel, such as accusing it of apartheid or genocide. So that you can't do that, or you lose your job. That's what Greenblatt is saying. I'm going to work with the agencies. We're going to keep actors. We're going to keep agents who express publicly, or perhaps even at the workplace, doubts, concerns, criticism of Israel, especially if they go so far as to claim it's apartheid to keep the Palestinians shut up in an open-air concentration camp, or go into West Bank and take their land and herd them into cities. If you claim that's apartheid, well, you don't have a license to do that. We're going to get you fired. If you say dropping bombs on people you told to head south and then they head south and you drop bombs on them, if you call that genocide, we're going to fire you. Well, that's a blacklist. That's wrong. That's something we shouldn't be doing in this country. Now, I don't know if there's anything illegal exactly about it, but it's just wrong. Is it that absurd? Is it that crazy to make accusations against Israel of apartheid or genocide? Is Greenblatt right? That that's just beyond the pale? We can't do that? Well, let's see. What does let's go to I'd hardly call this an ultra-liberal, left-wing, progressive organ by any stretch of any imagination. There's just no way you can call it Time magazine. It's really the establishment voice, right? This is the magazine that gave Hitler Man of the Year back in like 38 or something, or whenever it was they did. So they asked that question. They asked this very question. And I appreciate that they did this. Good for Time. Is what's happening in Gaza a genocide? Experts weigh in November 14th. And I really think they did an outstanding job because they come to the same conclusion I did, which is it's complicated. You can say it is. You have plenty of argument and evidence to support that claim, but genocide is such a fraught term. It reflects or describes such evil that, as evil as what Israel's doing, it may not quite meet a strict definition, especially because you really do need intent, right? The goal of eradicating a group of people is kind of what genocide is, right? And it's not clear. So, like, I wouldn't call what the transatlantic slave trade was one of the most evil things that ever happened. I put it right up there at the top, along with the Holocaust and some other examples. Is that true genocide? No, because there was no intent to kill Africans. The intent was to many were killed. Millions died as a direct result. They were killed. They were slaughtered in many ways, as well as many were enslaved. Many millions more were enslaved. But it wasn't a genocide because the goal wasn't to kill the Africans. The goal was to force them to work at the, pain of being whipped or having parts of your body removed. That isn't, it's evil. It's as evil as it gets, but it isn't quite genocide. Is what we did to the Native Americans, what European Americans did to Native Americans, is that genocide? I think you have a good argument. I don't say it wasn't, but there you might even still make the claim it wasn't the goal of wiping them all out. But you could say it was. There's plenty of evidence that, yes, at least many white people did act with that direct goal. So certainly there was ethnic cleansing, the Cherokee Trail of Tears, and others. Genocide is reserved for the worst things that humans do to each other. Among the worst things, one of the worst things. So is it genocide? Well, again, there's some reasonable differences of opinion. And you can see pictures that obviously reflect incredible inhumanity. Bombed out cities, children without home, homeless kids, babies in incubators. I mean, this is really, really bad. You look at a city like that, you say, well, yeah, it sure seems like their intent is to wipe those people off the face of the earth, or at least push them off into the desert or something like that. You can make that argument. I don't know if it's proven by this, but it's certainly evidence. I don't think calling what Israel's doing genocide is beyond any pale. It's reasonable. Raz Siegel, Program Director of Genocide Studies, they should know, right? I mean, that's their job. They're the Program Director of Genocide Studies at Stockton University. Says it's a textbook case. This is exactly what genocide is, says Raz Siegel, pointing to the mass levels of destruction, total siege of basic necessities. There are others who take a different view. But wherever you come down, the argument that calling what Israel's doing in Gaza genocide is somehow beyond the pale. It's absurd. You can't even say it, according to Greenblatt from ADL. It's ridiculous. He's totally wrong. And the idea that someone who says this puts their job at risk is horrible. It reflects we don't live in a free society. I understand it doesn't impact on freedom of speech, but you're still not free if you could lose your job because you say something on social media that your employer doesn't like. That is totally reasonable, and that is made presumably with the goal of expressing some compassion and empathy for a persecuted, oppressed group, and maybe rallying support for them. You say that, you'll never eat lunch in this town again, presumably. That's not freedom. Some of the critics of Israel, as I mentioned, have lost their jobs. They have been fired. There is a new blacklist. So I don't know who Spyglass is. They don't explain that to me, but I don't know. That's, I guess, another agent. That must be a production company that makes movies. So they make the Scream movies, right? They're very popular. Nev Campbell was in the first three, I guess. Henry Winkler, Fonzie was the principal. Spyglass has said, we don't want Melissa Barrera in our movies anymore. She referred to Israel as a colonized land, which how is that wrong? It is, right? I mean, many of the Jewish people living there, came very recently and took land there. Now, I don't say that's necessarily wrong. I mean, but it's the way it is. And even if it isn't, then argue about it. Argue with her. So she calls Israel a colonized land, and worse, apparently, she floated an anti-Semitic trope that Jews control the media. Western media only shows the Israeli side. Why do they do that? I will let you deduce for yourself, says Barrera. Now, she doesn't respond to requests for a comment. My guess is she's negotiating with Spyglass. She wants the job. And they're going to figure out something. They're hoping to figure something out. And by the way, if I'm Spyglass and I think of her as like she sells popcorn, I ain't firing her. I'm going to figure out something, right? But maybe they feel like it would be worse for them to keep her. I don't really know. I will let you deduce for yourself. So I don't think that's a anti-Semitic trope at all. I think the reason, if you want to argue, now I think she's wrong, though. Clearly, Western media doesn't only show the Israeli side. I mean, we just went through this. I have to give CNN props. They have shown a lot of the carnage wreaked by Israel. We saw pushback by Wolf Blitzer against an IDF spokesperson. We even saw even more amazingly, Morning Joy, or is that what I guess she calls her? There's Morning Joe, but there's also Joy Reid. I don't know, is it Morning Joy? She pushed back against it. So the media hasn't been quite as bad in this case as it, say, has been when it comes to Ukraine, for example, where they are just cheerleading that war. But if you want to argue that the Western media has been too deferential to Israel, I have no argument with that. So I don't say they only show the Israeli side, but they disproportionately present arguments in support of what Israel's doing, which is, indefensible. Why? I'll let you deduce for yourself. Well, how is that anti-Semitic? She's not telling you, she's asking you. How is that anti-Semitic? She's not saying it's because they're filthy Jews. That would be anti-Semitic. I mean, the answer is, as far as I would say, is because money. Because money, because advertising money, because of influence by supporters of Israel. That's why. Just like Congress. Congress is worse than media, by the way. Congress has been far less willing to criticize Israel than the media. And yet, what little criticism we're apparently hearing, or that Biden has heard, has made a difference, apparently, because that's why we have the ceasefire talks, and hopefully the ceasefire coming. So this is absurd. She shouldn't be fired for alleged anti-Semitism. It's not, or at least it hasn't been documented. 2-4, but there's a blacklist. You can't say what you believe. You can't make very, very reasonable arguments about Israel. You can't say it's an apartheid state, even though it is. You can't say that they're committing genocide against the Gazans and the Palestinians, even though there's a very solid argument that they are. You can't do that because, according to Jonathan Greenblatt from ADL, you can't wage unfair accusations, which are clearly perfectly fair. Maybe wrong, arguable, they're arguable. I err on the side of calling what Israel's doing in Gaza a genocide, but I do that with some caveats. All right, 240-363-7190. But if you say it and you have a job in Hollywood, you'll lose it. Very, very possibly. Now, apparently not if, A, you apologize, like Maha did, and not if your top client is Tom Cruise. Then you can say whatever the hell you want. Susan Sarandon, in her, I think, late 70s now, not the star she once was. She was dropped by the agency UTA for saying frightened Jews are getting a taste of how it feels to be Muslim in America. Page 6 reveals. I don't. Is that offensive? I mean, I'm Jewish. I'm not really offended. I'm not. I don't consider Susan Sarandon to be an anti-Semite. I mean, she was all in for Bernie for president. Bernie's Jewish. How anti-Semitic can you be if you support Bernie Sanders for president? So I'm not clear why that would get you fired. But at least it lost you your agent, which in Hollywood is very, very big. Right, let me get back. I pop that up for a second. So yeah, that's an issue. Hollywood has a blacklist, and it's wrong. You know, when you always say, well, what would I do in times of moral uncertainty? Would I do something? Like, would I fight the Nazis? Would I fight slavery? And we are seeing this kind of evil right now. What are we doing to stop it? Okay, more from Hollywood. Just a little more on the blacklist. We're almost done for the show. 240, but you want to join me? I still have time. 240-363-7190. So back to Mahad Dakhil. She wasn't fired. Remember, she's the agent at Creative Arts Agency, if that's what they call it. And let's get right into what she said and how she was almost fired. So from CAA, Mahad Dakhil, one of the top agents, ignited a firestorm. She wrote, "What's more heartbreaking than witnessing genocide? We're going through this. It's perfectly reasonable. It's not outside any pale to call what Israel is doing genocide. What's more heartbreaking than witnessing genocide? Witnessing the denial that genocide is happening." I am very sympathetic to that because I feel like I'm often talking to people with their ears and eyes closed. I make this argument on social media, on Facebook, and people just don't want to hear it. They just aren't able. Now, maybe a lot of Jewish people, I don't want to make it about religion exactly, but a lot of Jewish, but I know people who aren't Jewish who defend Israel's indefensible actions. I think there's this, we're tribal, right? So you're Jewish, you think you're part of a Jewish tribe. Israel is the Jewish state. So you have that emotional tie. I don't have that kind of stuff. I just don't. I mean, it's like, I try to just look at what people do. I get things wrong all the time. I try to look at what they do. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it right? Is it wrong? But a lot of people feel like they can't admit that their people, their group, those they support are bad people or just doing bad things. They just can't do it. It's like the people who voted for Trump. They don't want to admit that Trump really was pretty bad on January 6th. Now, was he trying to take over the government? I think he wouldn't have objected if someone had made him king that day. I'll say that. It's like the people who call themselves Democrats. They can't bear to acknowledge that the whole impeachment of Trump for allegedly conspiring with Russia or colluding with Putin or whatever he was doing was just based on nothing. Hot air. Zip. So people get in their tribes, they're Democratic, they're Trump supporters, they're Jews, and we support Israel if we're doing it. So, and they can't break out of that. It's very sad. So I get why Dakhil is so upset. That denial, that refusal to acknowledge your group is doing evil. And as a result of saying something that was completely legitimate, completely reasonable, she was relieved of her duties as co-chief of the motion pictures department. There's a new blacklist in Hollywood, but they did let her stay an agent. So why? Well, here's where we give Mr. Cruz his due. He said, nope, she's my agent. I'm a $20 million movie man, probably more than that. All those MI movies he made, a mint. I think billions, right, if you add them all up. And she's a 10%er. Isn't that what you call agents, 10%ers? So he probably has a piece of those movies. I doubt she gets 10% of the points that he has, right? Like if he gets 5, well, maybe she does because she negotiates those points. She goes to Universal Pictures. That's the one who made the MI movies. I don't know whoever made them. She goes to the pictures and she says, "Hey, my guy's going to bring you $500 million in sales, and he wants some of that. I want him to get 5% of the gross over once you get your 300 million, it's all gravy, baby." So my guy gets 5% of everything over the first 300 million in sales. We're not talking about profits. We're not going to let you can't use your accounting tricks. So that's what Mahad Keel says. So let's say they go along with that. So let's say the movies gross 1.3 billion. The movie grosses 1.3 billion. Cruise gets 5% of that, which is he gets 5% of that 1 billion over the 300 million. 5%, if I'm doing my math right, $50 million. She's a 10%er. She gets 5 million. So she's bringing that into the agency. Somehow it seems like it should be even more. His points may be more than that. I don't know. I'm just working with raw numbers. But whatever it is, that 50, let's say it's 5 million for that one movie. That's a hell of a lot she's bringing in. She probably gets a percent of that, 10%, I don't know, whatever. She gets a nice chunk herself. Tom Cruise would just, if CAA fired her, she'd go work on her own. She'd open her own agency. And Tom Cruise would follow her. So, of course, CAA isn't going to fire her for that. Just not worth it to them. If you're that big a shot, you can get away with stuff. But remember, you get away with much. She apologized, said she was sorry. Never happened again. Thank you for educating me. Thank you, sir. May I have another? Basically, the response. And she kept her job, although lost her title as co-director of the motion picture